And straight ahead of us is Hart Island. Way up here on the right, some type of foundation. Definitely an old structure. I notice it says prison, keep off. There's a cool sign up on the left that says Hart Island. Looks like it's got the City of New York logo on there. It says restricted access, authorized personnel only. Hey guys, this is Matt with 2 Feet Outdoors YouTube channel. Today, I'm in City Island in the Bronx, New York City, and I'm getting ready to take a tour of Hart Island.
This is a multi-agency operation, so in order to be even able to get access to the island, we're working with DOT, the Department of Transportation, HRA, the Human Resources Administration, who is handling the contracting of burials on the island, as well as us, the Parks Department. By the way, hello, we are the Urban Park Rangers. My name is Ranger Victoria. Hi, Ranger Victoria.
And my name is Ranger Ben.
Hi, Ranger Ben.
We're joined today by Rangers Adam and Ranger Josh over here, who are going to be helping out and contributing throughout the program as well. Anytime you see one of these cool hats, if you have a question, feel free to ask it, okay?
So the ferry will be leaving at 10 a.m. sharp. That's about 5 minutes away. We will be on the island for about 2.5 hours. To be just completely transparent, we will be there in the elements, right? There are no buildings that we're going to be able to go inside to, and there are very few places to sit. We're also going to be dealing with some uneven terrain and very likely some mud from the weather that we had recently. You all know it's February. Happy New Year. The groundhog saw its shadow, so we have 6 more weeks of winter, and you will feel it today with the 24 miles per hour winds that we will be receiving on the island. So you know yourself, you know your physical limitations, so you have been forewarned. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to tell you that Staten Island Sam, or whatever that groundhog, didn't see a shadow.
He didn't see a shadow.
And said there will not, and that one has an 85% chance of being correct.
I'm from Alabama, where we use Sand Mountain Sam, the possum. North America's only marsupial. Sand Mountain Sam also said spring is coming early. So
I don't remember her name. There's a chicken in.
Does anyone else have any weather clairvoyant animals to talk about before we head over?
In Westchester with the name of Cluxatani.
But we're not talking about that history today. We're talking about Hart Island's history and its role that it plays in the greater New York City history. So a few more logistical things before we get going. I want to just remind us all, we're all aware that Hart Island is an active cemetery. So we're going to be doing a historical, interpretive tour for you about the history of the island, the institutions of the island, the people of the island. And photos and videos are perfectly all right. You can take photos of us, videos of us, but there will be moments where we might be passing some burial plots, some active burial plots, and we ask, out of respect for anyone here on this tour who may have family members who are buried here on this island, out of respect for them, please do not take photos or videos of these plots. Please do not walk up to these open burial plots. We have our rangers on standby who will come, and you will get very embarrassed if we have to come and tell you that. So again, just out of respect for those who have passed on, please do not take any photos or videos of that.
And we will be letting you know where those areas are, so if we haven't told you ahead of time, it's probably okay to go ahead and take a look.
Have any of you folks been on a ranger tour before? Park ranger tour?
A few?
Well,
See a few hands?
Not here.
Not here? Well, yeah, we are the Bronx Urban Park Rangers, but we are also city rangers. So alongside doing these historical tours, we also do wildlife rescue within New York City parks and provide a uniform presence in our green spaces. And environmental education programs, which includes our free weekend adventures. And that's everything from trail hiking, guided birding tours, in the summertime fishing, canoeing, free overnight camping, astronomy hikes, puppet shows. So we do a bunch of different things. We camp in our parks in the Bronx. If you are interested in learning
Usually
more,
it's Orchard Beach or Van Cortlandt Park.
if you're interested in learning more, come chat with us after the fact. Or you could find us if you Google Urban Park Ranger events. We're the first hit. I think we are just about ready to get on to the boat. So again, if you didn't use the porta potties here, there will be a few on the island itself. That is our only form of bathrooms here. So as long as all of those physical demands are all right for you, we can all start walking. So just a reminder,
So folks,
windy day.
you're going to follow behind Ranger Adam. There is a vehicle that has loaded itself onto the ferry, so just watch your step as you're making your way in. But we do ask you to go ahead and make it to the ferry now. There are porta-johns available on the island.
32.
Hold on to your hats when we get on the boat.
All right, guys, we are walking to the ferry, to board the ferry to Hart Island. We're leaving the ferry terminal at City Island. Thank you.
Where's the kayak?
How are you? How's it going? Good.
Yeah, we're all a fan. We're a fan.
Really?
We watch all your videos.
That's amazing.
We watch all your videos inside. Okay, let's take one picture with
That's awesome, man. I love it. That is so cool.
I'll take a picture.
Jump in, yeah.
This is great.
Jump in.
Jump in.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So good to meet you guys. That's awesome.
When you was behind our boat on the other side on Hart Island.
Oh, okay, cool.
Or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah, you just did over there by Co-op.
Yep. Camped overnight, and as a matter of fact, the other day, actually yesterday, I paddled out to Hoffman and what's the other island? Swinburne. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
That's rough. I think it's rough out there.
Well, you know, I clearly pick and choose the days I go kayaking, so I make sure it's low wind days, you know, and this way it's safe. Especially, you know, when I paddled around Hart Island.
Oh, that was a cold day, yeah.
It was a cold day, but it was super calm. The water was like glass. So yeah, it was really cool. I actually paddled out to that lighthouse over there too recently.
That was a great video.
So I make my rounds.
You gotta hit David's Island next.
Yeah.
One island to David's Island.
Yep,
You know,
absolutely.
so that way, that's nice up there. That used to be they're all built like here. They just knocked the buildings down, but they were all the military buildings over there as well.
Yeah. So now the only building left here on Hart Island is the church, right? And it's being renovated? Or
Yeah, they want to make a visitor center out of it.
okay.
You know? And the only other thing that's left on Hart Island are the missile silos up on the north end.
Okay. That's
You know,
cool.
but they're all fenced off and capped.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And then on David's Island, that's supposedly where the controls were for the missiles on Hart
Oh,
Island.
wow. That's
So
interesting.
that was like full-on military. David's Island was full, military. Where
Yeah.
Hart Island was, they had the silos there, but it was more corrections. This is just a little fun fact. This is the oldest Staten Island ferry.
This one here?
This one here,
Wow.
1961.
Wow, okay.
And inside, if you want to take a clip, the whatchamacallit's up there, the plaque.
Oh,
was,
okay.
commissioned.
Yeah. So yeah, cool. So good to meet you guys. Yeah.
Good luck with everything,
Yeah. All right, we'll see you guys. Yeah.
Questions, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, we're coming up to Hart Island.
Their vehicle will be getting off first, so we'll want to get inside and get plenty of space for the truck.
It's basically like a drawbridge,
Yeah.
like you saw in the medieval days.
Yeah.
The bridge weighs 100 tons. And inside the gallows, the counterweights,
Yeah.
45 tons on each side.
Wow.
And that reduces the weight to less than 10 tons.
That's incredible.
And then we
Yeah,
just
and then
have
the
it-
chains just lower it slowly.
Yeah, because like, this is now, if you notice, this is if you've been to the Brothers Island,
Uh-huh.
they have the same setup. It's all, dilapidated,
Right.
But if you look, you see the towers are still up. It's the same. This is what they used all over the city back when. I think this is the last operating manual one. There might, Governor's Island, there might be one still. And then all the other ones are automated, like the Staten Island Ferry, those have all been automated.
Yeah, that one day I paddled around here, a ferry was coming over and picked up a truck. It looked like it looked like a black SUV.
Right. Right, those are the contractors working on the ferry.
Yeah.
Originally, the plan was to knock everything down. And then when the city came, there was some inspectors that came and they were like, oh, it'd be a shame to knock the church. The church was, all the buildings were in really bad shape.
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, let's see if we can, renovate it, and they're doing it now. It's going to be more of a visitor center than anything else.
Understood. Thank you, man.
No problem. I'll be back.
Yep.
So folks, as we make our way up, we're going to gather under this pine tree up here to your right.
So we're here, we made it. Wonderful. So, welcome to Hart Island. So, now I've taken a moment to take it in, to notice the surroundings around us. I would like for you to make a new friend for a moment, and I would love for you to share with them, when did you first hear about Hart Island, and what do you know about it? So I'd love for you to turn and talk to someone, maybe someone you haven't spoken to before, because yes, we are the Rangers, we'll be giving you this tour, but we also want to have a conversation, and we want to hear from you. So, when did you first hear about the island? What have you heard about it? I love this. I told you to talk to each other, and I heard the crickets and the shock, and now you're all chatting with one another. So you've shared with each other. I'd love for you to share with me, with us, the Rangers. What are some things that you've heard about the island? I've already heard someone share about hearing about it for the first time in the 80s during the AIDS pandemic. So might be a similar experience for you. What are some other experiences?
Heard there was a prison?
Heard there was a prison here. Yes, there was. What else have we heard?
A Civil War burial ground.
Civil War burial grounds. You are correct, sir. Someone said tuberculosis ward? Yes. There have been many different institutions on this island.
Many different departments that own it.
And many different departments that owned it. That's right. You are all hitting on things we're going to be chatting about on this tour. So I really like that. If you were to describe Hart Island in one word, if you were to sum it up in one word or a very short phrase, what would it be?
Cold. Cemetery.
Cold. Cemetery. Isolated.
Desolate.
Fear.
Desolate.
Peaceful.
Peaceful.
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary. All of this is true. All of these themes, all of these words can describe the island. And there has been a lot of mystery on this island. Limited access, right? Heartbreak, and of course, death, right, surrounding this island. Fear. But there's also been a lot of courage. There's been a lot of resilience, technological ingenuity, and peace, even fun. So what our goal is today on this island is to destigmatize some of the negative connotations, some of the fears around it, to contextualize it, and to explore it and investigate it and learn something new today, and maybe see it in a new light or a different light. And we want to have a conversation with you. Like I said, we are interpreters of this island in the fact that we were taking the facts, the historical facts, and we're going to be telling a story. We're going to be presenting a story. And there is so much that has happened on this island, so much information to give. We're barely going to scratch the surface. Again, we're only going to be exploring the north side of the island, but we're going to do our best to cover what your curiosity is interested in. So with that, let me hit you with some fast facts about the island itself. So this island, it is the city's public cemetery. So a question you might have is, who gets buried here and why? The processes of how it goes is that those who are unknown at the time of death, or their next of kin is not found, or those who cannot afford a private burial or simply choose to get buried here, that's how folks are chosen to be buried on this island. So the process goes, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner handles the authorization and transport of decedents onto the island. And to this date, most people who are buried on the island now are known at the time of death, are identified. But again, it's a place the city has for those who cannot afford a private burial, again, who their family members, they might not be able to be reached or contacted, or perhaps if someone perished in a fire and they can't be identified, they will get laid to rest here. How many burials per month? I'm not sure per month, sir, but I can tell you that per year it's around 1,000 burials a year.
It varies month to month, in the same way that the rates of death inside of New York City vary month to month. Ordinarily, we have our Hart Island coordinator here, Kayla. She's not available to be with us today. She has a lot more answers for those logistical questions. So we'll do our best to answer any questions you folks might have. But keep in mind, like Ranger Victoria said, we're only going to scratch the surface on this tour today. So if you have a question that we can't answer for you, hold on to it. And we invite you when you get home today to continue learning and exploring more about Hart Island.
So with it being a public cemetery, that's actually something that's very common practice in Europe, right? So cities like London and Paris. But Hart Island itself is unique in its size. It's a mile-long island and about 1/3 of a mile wide, and its location, right? We took a ferry to get over here. Some of you probably took a train, maybe to a bus, to a car, signed a bunch of forms in order to even get access to this island, right? So it's isolated, and that is something, that's one of the words that I heard being said today. So when did it become the city's burial ground? The city officially bought it in 1868, and the first burials were happening in 1869. So over 150 years of burial. But as I mentioned, alongside this being a resting place for so many New Yorkers, this island also witnessed a lot of life happening. It was once home to so many different institutions, military bases, like you said, prisons, asylums, also workhouses. But as we explore the island and those institutions, we have the question, what was the promise of Hart Island, and did it live up to that promise? How do we take care of each other and of our most vulnerable populations in a city as big and as great as New York? So we'll be pondering that as we move to our next stop, and Ranger Ben will zoom in a little bit on some of those institutions. So I'm sure folks have some questions, so we'll take a few here, but hopefully we'll answer them along the way. Yes?
How did it get the name Hart Island?
How did it get the name Hart Island?
We'll actually talk about that at the next stop, so hold on to that question.
I was ready to answer, but I'll wait.
Given where we are, you have major abutments that are here, and I'm wondering when they were actually built onto the island.
Oh, that's a great question. Hold on to that.
Can you speak about the geology of the island, how it's formed?
Hold on to that. That's coming.
Yeah,
Hold on to that. It's all coming, baby.
Do many people elect to be buried here?
That is becoming more and more common. The question was, do many people elect to be buried here? And that is becoming more and more common as more and more people learn about Hart Island, what it means to be buried here. And as it becomes destigmatized and as access has improved, that's been a big part of changing the way that people think about Hart Island. Now, I don't know about you, but the wind out here is getting a little strong. So we're going to make our way just over past the porta-johns here. This is going to be your last best opportunity to use the restroom for a bit. So if you need to make use of the facilities, please do so now.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, we might just tell you, hold on to it. So.
Wow, guys, it's so early on in this tour. And already, I'm really, really amazed by Hart Island.
Thank you for coming. This is all of Hart Island you'll be seeing today. But prior to the change in jurisdiction for this becoming Parks Land, this was as far as you could come to visit Hart Island, even if you were here to visit a loved one. This gazebo that you see just over here to our left was put up by donation after folks saw what it was like to try and come and visit loved ones that were interred out here on Hart Island. It was managed by the Department of Corrections for a long time, and their philosophy was to treat it like a corrections facility, which meant very tightly controlling access. So one of the things that we've tried to do as Parks has taken over is begin to broaden the scope of what it means to visit Hart Island, who has access to it. All of you folks signed up for a lottery today, which means that you were chosen at random as groups so that everybody had a fair opportunity to get the chance to visit. As Ranger Victoria was mentioning, we're only going to scratch the surface of the things that we can talk about here today on Hart Island, and there is a second tour that is done around the south end of the island that gets into some more of those subjects a little more deeply. So let's talk about the what of Hart Island. We had quite a few questions about that. Does anyone know where we are right now?
Yes,
Say again?
just above the Hellgate.
Just above the Hellgate, yes? What's this body of water that we can see on both sides of us here? That's right, we're out here in the middle of the Long Island Sound. We're about 14 or 15 miles from the center of Midtown Manhattan. We are about as far away from the middle of New York City as you can get and still be in what is technically considered the 5 boroughs. The name Hart comes from a couple of different places. We're not quite sure exactly what it's in reference to. However, it is shaped originally a little bit like the anatomical heart, so don't think the Valentine's Day heart. Think the actual organ that's pumping inside of your body. At one point, it was also called Spectacle Island. You can see the large portion here, and the area over there that looks a little bit wooded to the north. This area where we're standing right now was actually a very thin strip of land that was filled in with coal ash from the Department of Education to create a foundation here. That's why you'll notice there are no markers in this area. This area is above the water table, but just barely, so this would not be a good spot for folks to be interred. You might have heard Ranger Victoria say the word decedent earlier. We're going to use some terminology you may not be as familiar with before. A decedent is how we refer to someone who has passed on or the deceased. Interment is the act of burying a body, and if that body is taken out, it is called disinterment. And then if that body is then taken to another place and buried again, it is called reinterment. So that's all part of the process here that happens on Hart Island. You heard Ranger Josh mention a possible clue for the name of Hart Island that we saw earlier. Did anybody notice those tiny brown-black pellets over there on the ground? Who knows what that is? Deer scad, there you go. We often have deer that are seen here on the island. We actually had one that was very acquiescent and came right out in the middle of a tour, right as we were talking about it, right on cue. Every once in a while, the ranger magic really works. They can swim over from New Rochelle. They can swim over from Hunter Island right over on Pelham Bay Park. Deer are surprisingly strong swimmers. Just ask anyone from Staten Island. And we had a question about the indigenous folks that lived here. One of the challenges of Hart Island is there is no fresh water that accumulates here naturally. The fresh water that the animals that are out here drink all either come from recently installed fire suppression systems or places where the water will collect after the rain. So although there was evidence that the Siwanoy and the Lenape and the Munsee-speaking people would come and visit Hart Island and utilize it as a place to hunt and gather, there were no permanent settlements here prior to when Western folks came over and began colonizing New York City. So we also had a question about the structures that are here and around Hart Island. Did anyone see a picture of Hart Island from before 2020? A couple of folks? I encourage you to go back and look at some of those images, especially once you've had a chance to walk around the island today and see what it looks like now. We came over here with some of our contractors from JPL. They're the folks that not only take care of the burials now, but are in charge of the landscaping. So one of the commitments to the changes that were happening with Hart Island is to create a place that looked more welcoming and inviting. And to that end, I want you to take a look at this structure over here to the right. does sort of look like a church or a chapel, right? But what do you notice about it?
It's under
Scaffolding,
renovation.
no roof?
It's under renovation.
Under renovation? Sure. There's a tower, yeah. Do you see any other structures that even remotely resemble this building? I don't either. So as we're moving through Hart Island today, we're going to bombard you with a lot of facts. You're going to hear a lot of dates, you're going to hear a lot of names, you're going to hear a ton of information. And as for what this building is, there's an answer to that. There's an answer to when it was built, there's an answer to what's happening with it now. But I would invite you to take just a moment and take a look at this structure behind us and notice how it makes you feel. It's been estimated that there are nearly 1 million souls that have been interred on Hart Island. And for a lot of folks, coming here is not just a journey through history and through time, but it can be a spiritual journey. And I know that's kind of a loaded word, but that can mean whatever it means to you personally. And so while you're here with us today, we would ask that you not just learn the facts and not just learn the history, but notice the way it feels to stand in the sun. Think about how it feels to have this wind blowing across your face while you're here. As you see images like this building behind us with all of this construction and this modern equipment sitting around it, the last standing structure on this portion of the island that's been here for a while, how does it make you feel? Does it make you curious? Does it bring up questions that you'd like to have answered? So thank you for indulging me in a few moments of meditation as we begin to continue on our tour. Ranger Victoria next is going to take us on a brief journey through time to talk a little bit more.
Time, that's right. So why don't we walk a little bit more, get our bodies moving, generate a little bit of heat as we metaphorically walk through time. So Ranger Ben was telling us about one of the institutions here, right, and what that represents, and we reflected for a moment how that made us feel. But if we're thinking about Hart Island's place and role in New York City's history, we're going to zoom out a little bit, and we have a map here of New York City in 1797. So during the early Republic era, and into westward expansion, right? At this point, we had already signed the Declaration of Independence. We've been here for a while. We're like, this is our place, America. And immigration was coming to a big boom. We were growing exponentially every 50 years, because if we fast forward to 1849, that population of 50K people grew to 500,000 people. Not even 100 years later. So we're looking right before the break of the Civil War. At this point, New York City would have formed their grid system, and then in another 50 years, 1919 approximately, we grew to 5 million. So that's around the World War I era. We're getting into the Roaring 20s. The subways were built, the bridges were built, and today we have, how big is our population in New York City today?
7.5 to 8.
Yeah, 7.5 to 8 million. New York City is known for growing bigger and bigger and building taller and taller and higher, and our population showed suit in this travel through time. So, considering the boom and growth of immigration, the city had developed a lot of different needs, particularly in our human infrastructure, right? So back when we had a small town population of 50,000 in the 1700s, we had to make some decisions as the population boomed, right? So your one-room schoolhouse turned into a school system, right? Your local doctor that would come and do house call visits, that became a thing of the past. Now it's a healthcare system, right? So this growth had implications on how people lived and with how people died, right? How people would bury their dead. So before 1869 then, where were the city burials?
Well, you could bury people on Manhattan Island.
Park.
Manhattan Island, Washington
Also-
Square Park,
Also in Queens. It's not
also
New
in
York yet.
Queens. All right, so we have some people who know.
Yeah, Brooklyn.
Question then for you, for all of you, can you name me some parks south of Central Park?
Sure.
We already heard Washington Square Park,
Tompkins.
Battery Park,
Tompkins Square.
Bryant Park,
Park.
Bowling Green,
Staten Island.
Madison Square Park, Union Square Park. So yeah, Washington Square Park, Madison Square Park, Union Square, Bryant Park. These
St. John's Park.
were all cemeteries. These were all cemeteries before they became parks. And it was 1861 where the city banned burials below 86th Street. So with that expansion, the city kept moving north and outward. Our burials were happening on, I believe it was Randall's Island / Ward's Island. But by then that was moved from Manhattan outward, and then, as we know, in 1869, Hart Island became the place for burials. Keeping that in mind, the 1860s is where we are roughly. What else was happening around the 1860s?
Mind the thing called the Civil War.
The Civil War, that's right. So that era certainly created a strain on our systems and institutions like never before. And at our next stop, we're going to explore that a little bit deeper. But before we move on, any questions or reflections here? Yes, sir. Oh, the cholera epidemics. What year were the cholera epidemics? In the around the time with all the tenement housing and the overcrowdedness, right? Does anyone know the exact year? Because I don't. 1820s?
Hello, has anyone here served in the military before or have any close friends or family who have served? Okay, so we've got a couple of hands around for that. I personally was in the Army for almost 8 years before I became a Ranger. Did anyone who had those friends and family, did they talk with those friends or family about some of their experiences while they were serving? And was there anything they mentioned that might fit in with some of the themes that we talked about here on Hart Island? Don't have anyone there, but isolation, very useful for the training. We can hear all the shooting going on in the background as our police are training. And here was a site where 50,000 Union soldiers trained, and it was used as a spot for also about 3,400 POWs from the Confederate side of things. And then when there were unclaimed soldiers who died in combat, they were buried here. And they were later disinterred and reinterred at West Farms and in Cypress Hills at various points in time in our history. One of the units, yeah.
Where are West Farms?
Two of the cemeteries where soldiers who were buried here were later disinterred and reinterred there.
West Farms is in the Bronx?
Yes.
Okay. Cypress Hills is in Queens.
You can still visit that cemetery today.
Yeah.
Yes. So, one of the more famous units that trained here and served, 31st U.S. Richards, a 31st U.S. Colored Regiment, and at that point in time, if you might have seen about the riots that came with the draft, they were not eligible for the draft. At this time, we were living in a country where black people were not considered citizens in many ways. It's even codified into law that they were worth 3/5 of a person. But you had people volunteer for a country that didn't really treat them well in order to fight. In a war that we talked about how there's mass death and mass casualty, and so that's why we needed somewhere to bury people. The Civil War saw about 2% of the entire population of the United States die. If you think about that nowadays, that would be about 6.7 million people dying in battle. Or if you want to think about it in another way, imagine 5.5 COVIDs happening. So that's why burial grounds were needed for that time. Back then, people did not move beyond where they were born, or they very rarely did. And people got moved around for the Civil War. So we're talking about people who are fighting for a country that doesn't really care for them. They're leaving the only place that they've ever known. So a lot of people here were very, very lonely, were very, very afraid, and they fought in two of the most pivotal battles in the Civil War. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse, famous for, that's where General Lee surrendered. And I think one of the battles that I want to bring up, the other one, the Battle of the Crater. So this was a battle where a 500-foot long tunnel was built and thousands of pounds of dynamite was exploded behind Confederate lines. And this unit, the 31st, trained for 2 weeks for what to do after this explosion happened. And then some of the people in charge decided that they didn't like the optics of sending in a black unit first. So they drew lots and sent in another unit that had not trained and had no idea what they were doing. And then when that went terribly, then the 31st was sent in a battle that General Grant, the head general of the Union Army, said was the saddest sight that he saw of the entire war. You had about 4 Union soldiers die for every Confederate soldier, and there was multiple first-person accounts of black soldiers being targeted and killed, even when they were POWs, even when they were injured. And while all this was going on, the 2 heads of the Union military in that unit were in a bunker, passing a bottle of rum back and forth. One of whom had received no military training. They were famous for being an engineer who showed so much cowardice they had already created a mutiny. The other was famous for teaching dance and for being a part of Tammany Hall. Yeah. So has anyone ever had experiences with a boss that was incompetent and sent you to do something that you knew was going to go terribly? That's probably something we've all experienced, yeah.
Not at the Parks Department.
If your boss is here,
No comments.
If your boss is here, you don't have to mention that. And I promise you that they will not see this video. So after they're buried, this monument behind us was created. And so I'm going to give people 5 minutes to explore, to read. There is something written on the monument if they want to go get a good view at the Long Island Sound. I personally will be getting to one of the markers, and every time I'm here, I go to a different one and just have a quick little 20 seconds, because if I was here 150 years ago, that could have been me that died in combat. And so I feel a real kinship and a brotherhood with people who are here. And I encourage you to, as we go through this tour, to see how this could have been you 150, 200 years ago, or different times in Hart Island's history. Because even though so much of the island is hidden to our general experiences, people are people. And we all have the same dreams and goals and fears, and we can really connect with what happened long before we were born.
So folks, don't go too far, but as Ranger Josh said, please feel free to walk around for a little bit and explore this area. Take a closer look at some of the markers, including the obelisk that's here behind us. If you wanted a chance to explore a little closer to the shore, we'd encourage you to do it on the far side of the wall here. That area is a little less rocky.
At one point there was a fire, and some records were destroyed.
Yes, a few people had asked about that and got a chance to get a better look at it. What does it say on that wall over there? Prison. It doesn't just say prison. What else does it say?
Number 14.
It says, keep out.
Oh, yeah.
It's a warning to all the passing ships. So we talked a little bit about some of the various institutions. There was a time where actual internment happened here, beyond just the prisoners of war that Ranger Josh was talking about. And that is another one of the structures that's been allowed to remain, in part because it's a little bit iconic, and in part because it's a good reminder of the history of Hart Island. It's a visual touchstone for folks to remember about what this place used to be and what it is now. So we've had a lot of questions about these undulations and these divots that are in the land back here. So if I can rewind us back to the period where Ranger Josh was just speaking of, we talked a little bit about the cholera outbreaks of the 20s and 30s, but the United States' first brush with mass death was certainly the Civil War, in part because it was happening to so many people in such a protracted period of time. Now, if you're like me, and you're from the state of Alabama, and you get conscripted, and you fight all the way up here in New York City, and you die, how is someone going to come and claim my body in a period of time when it can't decay? Or when it won't decay? It's going to be a pretty big challenge. Maybe if you were rich enough to be able to get on board a train and bring the body back that way, you would have that option. But for most folks, that sort of option didn't exist. And you had soldiers and immigrants and folks from all different walks of life in all different parts of the country and indeed different parts of the world dying. And something needed to be done with their remains. But you might know that at a certain point, someone is going to come and claim that body. So that is what helped us start the system of mass burial that has continued on Hart Island to this day. When you hear words like mass graves or mass burials, and especially mass casualty, a lot of things come to mind. Some of them dark and scary, but as we've gotten to learn more about Hart Island, we've come to see that it's actually beautiful and orderly, and as we mentioned, it helps when someone is ready to come and disinter their loved one's remains and take them somewhere, maybe a little bit more personal, maybe a little bit closer to home. We all have different things that we'd like to have done with our remains when we're no longer here. But being able to have that option is a really beautiful and wonderful thing. So as you look behind us, you can see these rows here. These are some of the oldest burial marking areas here on Hart Island. You'll notice that these markers over here are made of stone, and even the stone, there's some spots that have been chipped away, there's some spots that are rough. You'll notice the obelisk has been painted over so many times now you can barely even read it, right? And those markers that we passed at the beginning, what do we think they were made out of? Yeah, some kind of plastic, right? PVC? And that's going to be able to hold up for a long time against all manner of different sort of elements. The markers that would have been here would have been made of wood. And they are very much gone now. So when burials happen on Hart Island today, they happen fairly similarly to the ways that the burials happen at the very beginning. There is no embalming process, except one of the things that's nice now is there's a QR code label on the pine box, but it is just a simple pine box, and they're stacked in rows, 3 deep, 4 wide, and 25 long. So the current plots fill about 200 souls. These, I believe, fill to about 150. And it's what's considered a green burial, in part because of the lack of embalming fluids, and because of the structure of the casket, means that over time, you are going to rejoin the earth. And if you look behind us, that's what these depressions are. When the burials were fresh, this area would have been completely flat and covered over. And as time has gone on, those souls that have been interred here are now fully part of Hart Island. So we talked a little bit about the Civil War and about America's first brush with mass casualty, but it would not be our last. Ranger Victoria showed you that all the way up until 1919, we were having population explosion here in New York City. It continued to grow at an exponential rate, meaning there were more and more people here with more and more needs that depended on more and more systems. And it wasn't just systems for how we buried our dead, it was systems for how we managed our ill, systems for how we would train our army, systems for how we would educate our population. And those systems are great. They can do things that on an individual level we cannot do, right? As a person, I believe they usually say there's about 50 people that you can sort of hold as a good personal connection with. And then beyond that, everybody's pretty much a stranger. Well, now we're talking about a city of nearly 5 million people by 1919. So that is way beyond any one individual's capacity to think about it. But we have these systems that are here in place to help us survive and help us distribute the needs to the people of the city. But the downside of systems is there's no personality. The education system might have a commissioner, just the way the park system has a commissioner. but it doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a name. It's the education system. It's the park system. And anytime you have an impersonal system like that, things can begin to fall through the cracks and fail to live up to the promise of making our lives easier and making things better for the people that need them. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more at our next stop. We're going to make our way just past the tree here to the left. You're going to see there's almost sort of a flat area that's a good place to walk. Just bear in mind your footing as you begin to move through, because the ground is still uneven in this area. Things that animals leave behind to let us know they've been here.
So this is not the site of a tragedy.
No, I would say this is very much the site of a tragedy.
Oh, okay.
So Canada geese are one of the species that we see out here a lot. We just passed a herd back that way. Now, we've never seen real good sign that a coyote has been out here. But we do know that they live just over on Hunter Island. There's several colonies all across the Bronx, and there's nothing stopping them from swimming over here either. But sick and dying geese can also be consumed by raccoons. Raccoons are very opportunistic predators. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting signs of wildlife and wild things that are here on Hart Island.
It's quite a mouthful for a raccoon.
Sorry? They have been known to go after fawn, but not so much in New York City proper. Our deer population here is pretty robust, so they tend to focus on the smaller mammals, things like that.
Raccoons don't have salivary glands, so they really have to be near water, though. There's no water on the side.
Well, there's no natural source of fresh water on this island. However, you might be able to still see it from here, that red thing in the distance there. Fire suppression has been installed here on the island, which means there is fresh water that sometimes leaks, or it especially can accumulate after the rain. And then there's nothing that stops a raccoon from swimming back and forth between here and here in City Island or here in Hunter Island as well. Raccoons are also pretty good swimmers. But speaking of our water systems here, why would we need fire suppression on the island?
Grass fires?
Yeah, exactly. There's still people here. There's still things here that matter, even though there are not any of the traditional structures. And in the very same way, there have been a lot of institutions that have occupied this island over the course of its history, which Ranger Victoria is going to talk about now.
What a great transition, Ben. Why don't we keep walking? Speaking of institutions and facilities, we'll get a little closer to the facilities here, so if anyone needs to peel off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, please take a look at a bird that's jumping right here from the island. Like Ranger Ben said, they are excellent swimmers. And another fun fact,
Deer.
you
Antler.
missed it earlier, hart is an Old English term for deer. So I'm just walking us over here. There are some rocks behind me. We're going to be going up. Our next stop is going to have some more seating. But before we get there, if you want to take a seat a little bit here, just for a quick break. We've been standing and walking for a few hours. What are these concrete pads for? Great question. I won't answer that right now, but we will answer it soon. What are some of the things we noticed on the way over here? Someone made a question about the cross that there is here. So Ranger Ben was talking to us about those institutions, right? That promise that Hart Island made to its people, to taking care of our populations, of our most vulnerable or those at risk. And in that vein, there's kind of something that we call the 3 C's of the island, and that is the care, correction, and containment, right? Talking more about that isolation. When the city bought the island off from the Hunter family in the 1860s, they paid $75,000 for it. And at the time, the jurisdiction was for the DOC. Can anyone tell me what the DOC stands for? Department of Corrections, exactly. Now, at the time, it was known as the Department of Corrections and Charities. So, the idea of rehabilitation as well as refinement and restructuring was all kind of in the same vein there. Now, why did I bring up the cross? Well, in the mind of all those different institutions, one of the institutions on the island, we learned about the prisoner of war camps, right, the military base trainings. One of the institutions was a nautical school called Mercury Ship School, which was a reformatory school for young boys. Now, the idea was perhaps kind of in in an idealistic sense, right? You get on an island, get some fresh air, you know, get away from the city and your normal triggers and any influences on you. These truants and troublemakers will learn some skill, get put to work, and make something of themselves, right? A very hopeful view. The Mercury school ship opened around the time that burials were also being conducted as well. So this was happening alongside these burials and these deaths. The school did eventually close, I should say, and 2 boys did drown during the operation of that school. So what my understanding is that cross is a replica of a memorial for those boys. But that comes to show that when you put institutions on an island, how can we pay attention to make sure that this care is being given well, right? So that's one of the institutions on Hart Island itself, but Hart Island is part of an archipelago, right? A group of islands in the East River. What are some of the other islands in the East River? Can you tell me?
North Brother.
North Brothers, North and South Brother, yes. Randall's, Rikers, yeah, Roosevelt, aka Blackwell Island, as it was known. Yeah, Randall's and Ward Island. Right, so all of these islands also housed asylums, prisons, and cemeteries before it got moved up onto here. And again, why put these things on an island? It's out of the way, right? People won't necessarily see it. But there were people who did say, hey, we're going to hold up a lens to these institutions to see if you are keeping up your side of the bargain, if you are caring for these people. And they were outsiders from the island, right? Not people within the system, but journalists. Like, maybe, have any of you heard of Jacob Riis? Yeah, a photojournalist, right? How the Other Half Lives. So, and Nellie Bly. Yes. So a little bit on Jacob Riis. Ranger Adam here is going to show you one of his experimental solo field photography here on Hart Island, where he actually took photos of prisoners conducting the burials here on the island itself. So, shining up a lens to the island, bringing what was hidden from the rest of the population to kind of make clear, hey, this is what's going on, you know, beyond what you can see right in front of you. And another journalist that is very significant, and we'll show you a photo of her as well in a moment, was Nellie Bly, who at 19 years old admitted herself to the insane asylum, as it was known at the time, on Roosevelt Island, or Blackwell Island. And we actually have an excerpt from her expose, 10 Days in a Madhouse, to articulate a little bit on what her experience was like there. So I would like to perform what could potentially be Hart Island's first ever skit here on the island. It's a very brief, I would want to say maybe 30-second show that we're going to put on. And I would love to solicit some volunteers. Who would like to play Nellie Bly? Who would like to play the mean city person? Nellie Bly? Nellie? Nellie, come on over. All right, and you will read the highlight bits. All right, who would like to play our city person? All right, sir, please come up.
Channel the hardness in your heart.
All right.
When Miss Group came in, I asked if I could not have a nightgown.
We have not such things in this institution.
I do not like to sleep without.
Oh, I don't care about that. You're in a public institution, and you can't expect to get anything. This is charity, and you should be thankful for what you get.
But the city pays to keep these places up and pays people to be kind to the unfortunates brought here.
But you don't need to expect to be kindness here, or you won't get it, she said, and she went out and shut the door.
Wow. Give it a round. Well done. That's actually the first time I've asked volunteers to do that, and you were amazing. I hope it goes just as perfectly the next tour. So these were people from the outside looking in, and they were shining a light, again, saying, hey, are you fulfilling your promise? Because I'm not sure if you're really keeping up with what the needs are. Silver lining of that, Nellie Bly was able to secure, I think it was $1 million to help with the funds and how we actually cared for our people in those institutions. Now, I don't know if it was necessarily managed well, but that's a story for another time. So, we talked a little bit about those journalists, but at our next stop, we're going to focus a little bit more on people who had a more direct relationship with the island, right? So, people from the inside reflecting outward.
Folks, as we make our way up the hill, there's going to be some benches, so you're finally going to have the opportunity to rest those dogs for just a little bit. So if you feel the need, feel free to grab a seat as we make our way to the top of the hill here.
Again, well done to our performers.
Prior to 2020, how were folks buried on Hart Island? And by who?
Rikers Island.
That's right. Folks that were being held on Rikers Island for non-violent and misdemeanor crimes could be employed to come out and work on Hart Island. And if you think about it, I don't know how your experience has been here today with the cold and the wind, but certainly compared to Rikers Island, this is pretty nice, right? There were a lot of folks who took a lot of pride in their work here. They would sometimes call themselves the Death Squad or the Baby Ghouls, the folks that helped to work out here and honor some of New Yorkers' last and least in their final moments as they were laid to rest here on Hart Island. But when you think about that kind of labor, they didn't really have a choice. We think about them wanting to choose to be out here and do this work, but oftentimes they were doing it for as little as 50 cents, or maybe at the most $1 an hour, to come out here and not just do hard, challenging physical labor, but hard and challenging emotional labor. Including this monument that you see behind us here. This is commissioned by one of the superintendents out here on Hart Island, done with, and built with leftover material from when the Navy was here. But it was made with the hands of prisoners. Built up as a symbol to try to memorialize the folks that had been laid to rest here on Hart Island. It may not have been mourned, it may not have been remembered. And we have, and are very fortunate to have, one of the folks who worked and labored out here on Hart Island in his own words. Kaz Torres was interviewed by StoryCorps a few years back about his experience working here as a laborer on Hart Island.
My mother was an alcoholic, and she couldn't take care of us. So I pretty much grew up in different types of juvenile institutions. And the day after her death, I was arrested for selling pot. I was released because the cops found a funeral card in my pocket. Sure, I was a kid, but that doesn't mean I necessarily had a childhood. And when I was in my late teens, I was arrested for a robbery. They moved me to Hart Island, the city burial ground, where people who were too poor to afford burial or just unclaimed bodies, they're buried there. I initially was on the cemetery crew, and I would bury the bodies. I don't think I was ever at the breaking point, but I can tell you this much. One thing that took a little bit more effort to really deal with was the babies. It's not something you should be seeing. I think back on it, and I just can't understand it. I don't see how this can happen, but you know, at the same time, I do understand. I do understand there's things happening in this world that a lot of the public are not aware of. The people who are unclaimed, I think they would want somebody to remember them. As simple as that. I think they would want somebody to come and see them. I think they would want somebody to care where they're at, and I think they would want somebody to mourn them. at least one person in this world you want to love you. And I think everybody wants that.
So, you heard a bit of Kaz Torres' story. That story is still going on today. He still lives and works in New York City, and he is one of the heads of an organization in the city that assists people who have spent time in prison in reintegrating with society after they get out, to find homes, to find jobs, and to just, adapt to a world that kept on moving forward while they were inside.
We've talked about how isolation can be a benefit at times. If you have tuberculosis, or cholera, or another rapidly communicable disease, it is to society's benefit to isolate you and put you somewhere where you cannot infect other people, but also a nice, lovely island in the middle of the Sound with bracing winds and the smell of salt to help yourself heal. And in the same way, if you have become detrimental to society through your behavior, sending you to a place to be isolated and reformed sounds like a really great idea, in theory. But we see, through Kaz's words and through Kaz's behavior since, that our systems do not work unless we do. They still need and require human touch to have meaning, and to live up to the promise that they wanted to live up to. There are many people that have been buried on Hart Island who chose to be buried here, and there are many more that did not make that choice. There are many people that have been mourned and cared for by loved ones that are now interred on Hart Island, but there are many more that have not. So we would invite you to take a few moments and explore the area here and around the Peace Monument, and to spend some time thinking about your fellow New Yorkers that have found Hart Island to be their final home.
Alrighty, folks. So we got a moment to explore a little bit more of the island here today and take note of the memorial behind us. And I believe Ben may have mentioned that it was constructed with materials left over from the Navy after World War I. So after World War I, what was happening in the U.S.
This is the original.
Post World War I.
This is when it was built.
In the 1950s.
That would be post-World War II.
It's also post-World War I, technically.
Technically also, yes.
I told him to jump in as needed. It was needed. Nike, what was that?
Red Scare! Now we're talking.
Red Scare.
We also had Nike missiles all around.
Nike missiles all around here. I'm sorry, sir. They weren't all around here. They were underneath us here. And right behind you. So this fenced-off area, during the Cold War, Hart Island was a strategic military base. So the federal government had a stake on this island as well. And like you mentioned, sir, yes, there were 20 NY-15s commissioned in 1954 to be housed here on the island. Now, the command center was nearby on David's Island, which is over there. If you go, when we explore on the north tip, you might be able to see some of it a little bit. But yeah, those were Nike Ajax missiles. So who was Nike? Greek goddess of victory, yes. And who was Ajax? Trojan warrior, that's right, tougher than Greece. Ajax. That's our guy. So, those missiles were here for about 8 years. They were decommissioned in 1962 due to military advancements, and we have Ranger Adam coming around showing you some of the structure, and also there was a school field trip here to see some of those missiles. So you're not the first tour out here. I mean, I missed that day in kindergarten when we came to visit a Nike missile silo base. But they were never employed. But again, like, thinking about isolation and separation, this was a strategic key point to have weapons of mass destruction here on this island. And going back to thinking about our workers on the island, the burials were still happening around this time. They were happening throughout all of these other institutions throughout the history of the island. And I'm curious, like, imagine what was it like to work here and to know that there were these missiles beneath your feet as you were working? Or did the workers even know that there were these missiles here? Maybe they knew, hey, the feds are here doing something, not sure what. It's the Cold War. I wonder, question mark? Again, hinging on those thoughts of fear, right?
It's
and
on
like
X-Files.
It's on X-Files, yes. But like, I think about that in our personal experience, because Ben, you and I are technically workers of a sort on this island, right? Now, we're not doing the physical labor here, and we have no say in any real decisions that happen on this island. But here we are doing our part as interpreters, as storytellers, and trying to tell you just a piece of this island's history while doing it justice.
And again, if you look at this area behind you, if you recall that paved path that made its way up here, the missiles were not just sort of dropped in. They were brought in and assembled underneath to launch upwards as part of a defensive system in the event of a nuclear attack. So they bring these missiles out here, all the way out on this island, way out here on the edge of New York City to help protect the rest of the city, or the important parts of the city, from a potential nuclear Armageddon. Why have these structures been preserved?
Does it cost money to take them out?
That's probably a very good part of it, for sure. But it comes back to this idea of what stories are we going to tell about Hart Island? What stories will we continue to tell as Hart Island changes and grows in the future? In part, it's stories that are more readily available because we have these touchstones that we can come back to. We can show you missile silos. We can show you buildings. We can show you structures like the Peace Memorial behind us. But like Ranger Victoria was saying, it's not all up to us. And as individual rangers, it's not up to us at all.
Yeah.
It's up to people like you, citizens of New York City that have a voice in what happens to Hart Island in its future. Yes? Yes. If we were to remove those concrete caps, you could climb down there. That's part of the reason why the fence is here, so that I don't trip and go on a nice long fall. I believe they go about 30 feet into the earth.
Now, the missiles are not there anymore.
We think. We're pretty sure. We're 99% sure. My favorite thing about Hart Island is that we're continuously learning more and more about it. When we first started doing these tours, it was believed that this wall behind us here was part of a Civil War morgue, because it's the area on the island where the morgue was located during the time when there were Confederate POWs housed on the island. We have since had some masonry folks come by and let us know that this construction is far too recent for that. So what is this wall? We don't know. We're still trying to figure that out. And every time we come here, we learn a little bit more about the folks that have lived and worked here, the folks that made Hart Island, and why certain things are still here that have been left here. One thing that I know that's undeniable is as you look out these windows back towards Pelham Bay and Orchard Beach and Hunter Island, not a lot of folks have gotten to see New York City from this view. This is a very unusual perspective looking back into New York City. So I'd invite you once again to take a few moments and be contemplative about your time here, about the things you've seen and the things that you've felt. Because they're just as important as the things that you've heard us talk about. The dates, the names, the locations, the time. All of it matters. But those feelings and those experiences are going to be unique to you. And as a visitor, you're now part of Hart Island's story. But you're among the first people in contemporary New York City history to set foot here on Hart Island. So I'd invite you to sit with that for a little bit as we continue to make our way through and explore down the hill.
that again a little bit to circle back around to the beginning. That historical interplay between parks and cemeteries. Now, Hart Island is, again, in the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. It is not a park per se, but it is park land. And another question for you all, and as we did in the beginning, we're going to do again now. Find a friend to chat with and find out, why do you go to a park? What reasons do you have to visit a park? I'm going to come and eavesdrop.
To enjoy time outdoors.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Or be with loved ones.
Yep.
Some
And
peace.
yeah.
Something natural.
Sometimes see wildlife depending on the
Yeah.
park. Birds. Beautiful nature.
Process feelings when I need to go for a brisk walk. And
Yeah.
get out of my head a little bit.
Are these
Exactly.
towers in West Farms? Where are they? 4 or 5 of them. I don't recognize.
Beyond City Island, south of City Island, over there's the Frog's Neck, right?
You talking about way off in the distance?
Yeah.
That's Manhattan.
Right?
Yeah, that's Manhattan.
So those are the new towers
Yeah.
in Manhattan.
A very unique view.
Unusual angle then. Okay.
Why do you visit a park?
Why do I? Contemplation, beauty of the park. I also like the history center behind it. Got another one.
You are
That's a jawbone.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Can I see real quick? That's really cool.
Please pass that
There's the
around.
deer
Yeah.
dentist. That's
Not me.
Look at those teeth.
Why do you visit a cemetery? Chat amongst each other. Find someone new.
the 19th century.
Why do you go to a cemetery?
In the 19th century, people used to picnic on it.
Really? Is that
Yeah,
a strict?
Greenwood and
People would
there's a
picnic
wood
on
lawn.
cemeteries?
Yeah, Greenwood in particular was famous for.
Really?
Yeah, people would go for a kind of party and do the rest, and sit around and look at the stuff, and of course, great views of the harbor.
Right.
And there really weren't too many parks in the state, so that was a very large green expanse.
Wow.
So they could go and see it. That was their call to fame, if you will. A lot of people want to be buried there because of that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Alrighty. As we close out our conversations, our sidebars, thank you for indulging me and for trying something new here on the island with us. So, what were some of the reasons that we go to a park, if you feel comfortable sharing? And at this point, I hope you are, because we're almost done. Recreation. Being in nature, right? Peace, reflection. Exercise. For some history, learning.
See wildlife.
See wildlife. What a picnic. Now, why go to a cemetery? Same thing. To spend time with loved ones.
Especially when there were no parks.
And that's what brings me back to the question of, why do we go to a park? Why do we go to cemeteries? And some of you I've already heard even mention it, so you know what I'm going to say now. Because in the 1800s, there was a movement called the Garden Cemetery Movement, or the Rural Cemetery Movement. And we remember all of those parks south of Central Park, Bryant Park, Washington Square Park. Those were all cemeteries. Those were all crowded, stinky, unsanitary churchyards. And as we know, with the population exponential boom, the need for that infrastructure grew, and the changes were made. And because those cemeteries were already allocated green spaces, it was natural for them to become public parks. They were already municipal spaces, and then they continue to be public. And that's the thing about parks, is that they are free and that they are accessible. So that's something that's been a source of contention here with the island, because it hasn't always been accessible. I mean, even today, you're here on a Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of a work week. So it's not necessarily accessible for everyone still. but we're working on it. So with the garden cemetery movement, places like Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, Evergreen in Queens, Frederick Olmsted was inspired by those cemeteries, and that's where Central Park got its inspiration from it. So, right, you have your place of work, you have your home, and then that third space right there in the park. Hopefully a place for, again, peace, reflection, recreation, and fun. So, speaking of recreation,
Let's walk and talk, everybody.
And
you're gonna get to see me do my best ranger, face you and try not to land in the mud.
Recreation and exercise, we're gonna get some of that in now.
Yeah.
As we talk about Hart Island, some of its success stories. Take it away, Ranger Ben.
Parks has no plans for Hart Island to become a recreation space. It's probably a good thing, right? Would you want somebody playing a game of pickleball right next to the remains of your dearly departed loved ones? Probably not. We want this to remain a place of silent beauty and reflection, a chance to take a moment to take a break from hustle and bustle. But Hart Island has served many institutions and many different kinds of people over the course of its history. And in fact, there was at one time a small baseball stadium here for the corrections workers when they were actually inmates that were housed here on Hart Island. At one point, when Hart Island was purchased, everything had been purchased by the city from the Hunter family, with the exception of 4 acres on the southern portion of the island.
Mud coming.
And that wound up being purchased by an African-American millionaire by the name of Solomon Reilly. Has anyone heard of Solomon Reilly before? Solomon Reilly purchased the southern 4 acres of Hart Island with the intent of creating a Coney Island for the African-American community in New York City. Although slavery had ended, segregation had not. And that has always been an intimate part of both American history and New York City history. So Solomon Reilly sought to use the isolation of Hart Island to create a space where people like him would be welcome. There was going to be a dance hall, a boardwalk. The city forced him to build his own water treatment facility here on the island. And just as it was getting ready to open, the city used eminent domain to take the land away. From their perspective, and what the official report said, was Solomon Reilly had also commissioned for there to be a lot of small boats to ferry people back and forth to the island. It was going to make it easier for prisoners to escape. Whether or not you believe the city is up to you. But they weren't the only institution that was here on Hart Island. There was also Phoenix House. Has anyone heard of Phoenix House before? What is Phoenix House?
Recovery.
Recovery and drug rehabilitation. Thanks to the existing structures here that had become dilapidated on Hart Island, Phoenix House was able to borrow those facilities from the city to create a community in isolation. Why would you want to create a community in isolation as you recover from addiction?
Prevent access from the drugs.
Exactly. So that's another one of those instances where the isolation of Hart Island can actually be a good thing. If you need to get away from the temptations of the city, from the struggles and the battles that you have with addiction, what better place to do it than out here? They even had their own garden where they could grow potatoes and cabbage and tomatoes. And at one point they made so much food that they were able to actually take it to their other locations in the city and distribute it away. They made more than even they could eat. But a key part that Phoenix House did for their residents here in isolation was reintegration, the next most important part of rehabilitation. Phoenix House would throw happenings out here. Has anyone ever heard of the happenings? My very first Hart Island tour, I had a gentleman who raised his hand and had actually attended one of the happenings here in the late 60s. They were music festivals. Can you believe that? Music festivals in a cemetery. The area that we're walking to now, the big field of coal ash, they would put up a giant tent and bring in the latest and greatest musical acts. There were rumors that the Doors were going to come play. I don't think that wound up happening, but the Velvet Underground did in fact come and play a concert out here on Hart Island. They were strictly straight edge. The friend that visited recalled there were 4 gentlemen who tried to sneak a joint onto the island, and they were unceremoniously booted. It was a sober event and a chance to celebrate recovery and community with the broader city.
And when the fiscal crisis hit in the 1970s, the ferry was no longer able to operate out to Hart Island. And so Phoenix House moved back to Manhattan proper. And we've got a really wonderful song from the Velvet Underground that I think makes for a nice reflective piece as we head to our final stop of the tour today. We never have as much time as I think we do. As I'm sure you've seen on the way in, Michael Cosgrove is already making its way back here to pick us up here in just a few moments. There's so much more to say about Hart Island that we wish we had the time for today. My first introduction to Hart Island was the images on the news at the very beginning of the pandemic, seeing folks being laid to rest here and feeling that palpable fear that I'm sure we all felt during that time. But there have been other health crises throughout the history of New York City that have been intimately tied to Hart Island. The AIDS epidemic touched on Hart Island in a very, very deep and meaningful way. And part of the reason why we now have a second tour where you can visit the south portion of the island is precisely because we don't want to shortchange those topics. But this area here has a temporary monument that's here for victims of pandemics worldwide. And it's a moment to come and reflect on all the folks that have been brought here, which Hart Island has been their final home. You can see these sample tablets that are over here behind us. This was an idea proposed at one point for new markers for the grave sites, where you can see the examples of how the caskets were laid in. And there are ledgers very similar to this that are kept on file with the city, so folks can know exactly where everyone is buried. And the records are perfectly reliable, I believe, back to 1974, where folks can still be claimed if you wish to have them disinterred and brought to somewhere private, or where at the very least you can now be brought to their gravesite with a member of Parks Enforcement during visitation days to stand nearby where your loved ones have been interred. As Ranger Victoria said at the very beginning of our tour today, one of the goals of the Urban Park Rangers and the Parks program in taking over management of Hart Island is to take that stigma and fear away that has so long been associated with this place. If you'd have a chance to see it in the same way that we see all of our other parks, as a place full of beauty to come and explore, to find a little bit of silence and peace and solace. Probably a little more solace when it's not quite so windy like this. But we wanted to take a moment to thank you folks for joining with us here today.
We hope that we upheld the end of our promise to give you a chance to explore, to learn, and hopefully enjoy your experience here with us today. Because now you are constituents, you are stakeholders of the island, and you are part of the island's history as well.
For those of you that took photos today, we really hope that you share them. And for those of you that have wanted to visit Hart Island for a long time and finally got your chance today, we hope that it was a great experience. But even more than that, we hope that you share what you felt and what you learned and what you saw today with as many people as you can. Because what is done here is done in your name as New Yorkers. And the beauty of Hart Island's promise is that if you have nowhere else to go, Hart Island is here for you. And we want you to take that message out and let people know what this place is and what it means, and that you are all a part of it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. You have been an amazing tour group. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We wish we had more time for a chance to explore this area, but unfortunately, the boat is here, and we don't want to spend the rest of the day here. It's going to be a little bit cold. So if you have further questions, feel free to grab one of us in the silly hats, but we need to go ahead and begin making our way back to the dock.
I will ask.
Yes.
It's windy, huh?
It's got to be windy, yeah.
So folks, just a reminder, as we pull out, there's going to be a loud horn.
We are leaving Hart Island. That was so incredible, guys.
Okay, folks, watch your step as you're stepping onto the dock. There's still a little bit of a left.
Hey, it was great meeting you guys.
Hey, nice meeting
yeah,
you.
thank you guys
Best
for
of
watching the
luck.
channel.
We'll keep watching.
Yeah, thank you.
know?
Appreciate it. It was great meeting you guys. Yep. Thank you, man. Great meeting you guys.
Did you want to get the plaque of the boat inside?
Oh, sure.
Oh yeah, this is like 1960s. It shows it, so you can come in. I'll leave you alone. That way you can do your thing.
Cool. I'll just take a shot of it real quick. All right.
All set?
Thank you.
This is the captain right here if you want to meet him. That's Alex.
How you doing? How's it going, Matt? 2 Feet Outdoors YouTube channel. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Great job getting us in there safely. I want to thank you guys for watching 2 Feet Outdoors YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly did. And we'll see you guys on the next one.